I am the mayor of the borough of New Milford. I want to welcome all of you here tonight, and I want to welcome everyone who's watching via live stream to New Milford's 6th annual Domestic Violence Awareness Symposium. At this time, I'm going to read the proclamation for Domestic Violence Awareness Month. Office of the Mayor Proclamation. Whereas domestic violence is a widespread and affects more than 12 million Americans each year. And whereas, according to statistics, 24 people per minute in America are victims of rape, stalking, or physical violence by an intimate partner. And whereas, this means about 3 in 10 women and 1 in 10 men are victims of or survivors of domestic violence. And whereas domestic violence is a serious crime that affects people of all ages, races, genders, and socioeconomic status. And whereas children that grow up in violent homes are believed to be abused and neglected at higher rates than a national average. Whereas domestic violence costs the nation billions of dollars annually in medical expenses, police and court costs, shelters, foster care, sick leave, absenteeism, and overall non-productivity. Whereas only awareness and a coordinated community effort will shine a light and put a stop to this criminal behavior. And whereas the Borough of New Milford has developed partnerships with county, state, and private organizations to spread awareness and education and is committed to the safety and security of all its residents and prosecuting perpetrators of domestic violence. And whereas Domestic Violence Awareness Month provides an excellent opportunity for residents to learn more about preventing domestic violence and to show support for the numerous organizations and individuals who provide critical advocacy, services, and assistance to victims and survivors. Now therefore I, Michael Petrino, do hereby proclaim October 2024 as Domestic Violence Awareness Month in New Milford and urge residents to know the signs, to report suspected abuse, and to reject and denounce behavior that mimics, minimizes, or makes fun of domestic violence in real life, movies, internet, gaming, or under any other circumstances. At this time, I would like to welcome and introduce the Superintendent of the Milford School District, Mr. Peter Galasso.
So good evening, everyone. It's wonderful to be here. I'm happy to be here because New Milford is certainly not passive observers. In the short time I've been here over the past 2 months, they're definitely doers. It was just on Sunday, we were at the ADAM event, which is, Alcohol and Drug Awareness Memorial, to talk about the effects of drugs and alcohol on society, but also honor Adam Roth, who was alumni here, who was tragically killed in a drunk driving accident. And now we're here tonight, just 2 days later, talking about domestic violence at the 6th Annual Symposium. So it means a lot to me when I say New Milford is a bunch of doers. They're not relying and resting on laurels for someone else to speak on people's behalves. They are the actual ones speaking. So I have to take this time also to advocate for my students, for the Board of Ed students. It's so important for us to understand that the domestic violence often does not just have one victim, but the children are victims as well. I'm not naive. Perhaps even tonight, there are students in our households that are witnessing domestic violence, that are victims of domestic violence, and we have to be aware of that. So by advocating for yourself sometimes, if you are a victim, it's not only you you're advocating for, it's also these students, and that's very important to understand because at some point we have to stop that domino effect because it just doesn't affect the present lives of these children, but the future as well. There's lasting ramifications. And then speaking of alumni, where's Mrs. Sharples? Miss Sharples, oh my gosh. Danielle Sharples, who, when I heard her name, she spoke here last year at the symposium, the 5th Annual Symposium. She was a student of mine, along with her brother. And I'm proud of you for coming up here and speaking. And now, Alexis Ruhlen, you're going to speak as well. And it's important that we hear from these people so we understand that we are not alone, that you are not alone, and to learn from their message so that we can carry that on. It's important, just like drugs and alcohol, that domestic violence stops as well. I want to thank the borough for allowing this, the Board of Education for allowing this, the New Milford Police Department, the prosecutor's office, the chief of police, all the agencies that are here that are willing to support this event. I appreciate it. Councilman Seymour, thank you very much. He actually, if you don't know, won an award, right? The Pro Bono Award in 2023 for hosting the symposium. So I thank you for being here. I thank you for taking time out of your night to be here. It's important, and it shows that you are doers as well. Thank you.
At this time, I'd like to introduce the Bergen County Prosecutor, Mr. Mark Masella.
I want to thank everyone for coming tonight. I want to start off by thanking Mayor Petrino for hosting this event. I want to thank Councilman Matt Seymour for organizing this event every year. I want to also thank the survivors that are here tonight. They're going to share their stories with us. I want to thank the panelists that are here volunteering their time. And of course, I want to give a shout out and a thank you and recognize Chief Clancy. I'm honored to be here tonight to have this opportunity to say a few words about an issue that is a priority for the Bergen County Prosecutor's Office. I'm particularly honored to be here and participate in events like this because they highlight the collaborations between law enforcement and agencies that advocate, raise awareness, provide services, all in an effort to eradicate domestic violence. According to the CDC, 1 in 4 women and 1 in 10 men experience some form of abuse from an intimate partner. That abuse can take many forms. It may be sexual, physical, or mental, and it wreaks a lifelong havoc on survivors as well as those around him or her. And all too often, domestic violence results in the death at the hands of an abuser. The bruises from domestic violence can be physical, psychological, and families can be impacted for generations. Domestic violence negatively impacts communities and has social and economic ramifications as well. Events like this one are crucial to breaking the cycle of domestic violence. We must listen to each other, we must teach each other, and we must keep the conversation going. We all bring unique talents and resources to this fight, and we must marshal these tools so that we can lend our collective strength to those who are vulnerable. At the end of the day, if one of us is unsafe, we are all unsafe. In addition to the work of the Domestic Violence Unit in my office, which is under the supervision now of Senior Assistant Prosecutor and Chief of the Unit, Verita Doni, who's here tonight, she's also my friend. She's also a zealous advocate for survivors. She is a seasoned trial attorney, and she's a friend. And I can think of no one better than to head up that unit. I'd like to give a shout out to Jessica Gompers, if she's out there in TV land. Jessica was the head of the unit, the domestic violence unit, for over 25 years. Again, a zealous advocate, a seasoned trial attorney, and really a warrior in the fight against domestic violence, and is well known throughout the state. And she continues to lend her expertise to our office and to prosecutors' offices throughout the state. So I want to give her a thank you and recognize her. I also want to recognize the work of our victim witness advocate in our office, Myra Sultan. Again, she works tirelessly with victims, and she is a zealous advocate on their behalf. Finally, I want to mention some of our community partners who fiercely fight for victims, agencies such as Alternatives to Domestic Violence, Healing Space, the Women's Rights Information Center, the Center for Hope and Safety, a Partnership for Change, and of course our area colleges and their offices of violence prevention. These men and women are critically important, and they impact the lives of survivors every day. In closing, I want to thank each of tonight's panelists. I want to thank all of you that are here tonight for your efforts, your partnership, your commitment, and your perseverance every day in making the residents and families of Bergen County and our communities and all in our communities feel safer. So thank you for having me, and I look forward to tonight's panel discussion. Thank you.
At this time, I'd like to call up Executive Undersheriff Cora Taylor from the Bergen County Sheriff's Department.
Good evening. It's a pleasure to be here. I stand here on behalf of Bergen County Sheriff Anthony Curitin, who could not be here today, and I do see Prosecutor Musella and Chief Assistant Prosecutor Adone, who I've worked with. Mayor, thank you. And on behalf of the sheriff, I'd like to thank the councilman as well. Domestic violence is something that can ultimately wreak havoc in a family or in a student's life because they enter into a dating relationship that may have challenges. We are pleased to see you here today, knowing that this is something that's important to you as well. And as in law enforcement, we say you see something, you say something. So we hope that while you're here today, you will get educated and you will find that this is something that's valuable to you and that you will be able to share this with people you know. If you see someone who you believe is having a problem, approach them and ask them, is everything okay? And then you've done everything that you can do. On behalf of Sheriff Anthony Curitin, I'd like to thank you and enjoy the evening.
We've heard statistics. We've seen statistics. What percentages of people are victims of abuse and domestic violence? What percentages of our friends, our colleagues, our loved ones, and our relatives are in abusive relationships within the coercive control of an abusive partner? But ultimately, do the statistics really matter? Do they really matter if the person that you know, who's a relative, a loved one, or friend, is trapped in such a relationship? How much does it really matter if you're the one trapped in that relationship? Because in that instance, the percent is 100. The sad thing is, everyone knows other people who are trapped in these relationships. And I thank you for coming here tonight, because by virtue of coming, attending, and sitting in these seats and watching at home online, you are the change. And you don't need to tell people you want to get involved to make a difference. Tell them you already are. Tell them you're already the change. Tell them you're already making a difference, because you're here, you're learning, you're listening, and you're paying attention. We were so privileged and honored a year ago to welcome an incredible speaker with the courage to share her story with all of you. It's an honor to once again introduce New Milford's own Danielle Sharples. Danielle.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this year's 2024 Domestic Violence Symposium. My name is Danielle Sharples, and I am the speaker of 2023. First and foremost, thank you for all coming to tonight's event. Last year, I stood up on the stage sharing my experience through mental, verbal, emotional, and physical domestic violence that took place during my junior year of high school at this school. Last year, I had the honor to tell students of New Milford High School what I've been through, hoping to inspire at least one person sitting in that room or one person home live streaming it. At the end of the event, I had a few people come up to me, thanking me for being strong enough to share my story. And because of them, I was able to come back tonight and do the same thing, but this time I get to introduce Alexis. Tonight, you'll be inspired by Alexis and her story. And over the course of a few weeks, while I got to know Alexis, she has been inspiring in everything I see her post. All over her social media, she is a strong advocate, not only by social media, but also by her college. She has done multiple different type of events. I've seen her run in a marathon, which I can never do because I cannot run, for domestic violence to raise awareness. Not only does her story inspire me, but with everything she has done, I can't wait to see her thrive throughout life, no matter what has happened and no matter what she goes through. I know she will get on the other side. She's not only just a survivor, but she is also a warrior, and I am so honored to introduce Alexis now. I'm gonna fix the microphone a little bit. No, it's okay. Hello, and thank you all for taking the time to come to the 6th annual Domestic Violence Symposium. My name is Alexis Ruhlen, but most people call me Lex. I was raised in a loving household with constant care and support from my parents. I was involved in many extracurricular activities ranging from dance and cheerleading to volleyball and softball. I worked, and continue to, hard academically. I love to read, cook, bake, work out, and spend time with family and friends. I have always had a passion for animals and people, and decided to go to college to become a nurse. I am painting this picture for you because many people have an idea of the kind of person who experiences interpersonal violence. The truth is, it can happen to anyone, any race, any religion, any gender, any socioeconomic status. It happened to me. On October 13th, 2022, I was brutally kidnapped and beaten by my boyfriend at the time, taken from Ramapo College, where I was harassed, threatened, and stalked for hours prior. He was also a student there. I was told that I would never get away from him alive. I didn't think that I would ever be able to get away from him alive. Our relationship began almost 2 years previously, in December of 2020. I was almost immediately swept off my feet. We went from not knowing each other to being together almost every day. He was always taking me on different adventures, dates, hiking, and skiing. My previous boyfriends had never really taken me on dates like this or made me feel this way. I felt like this was my first real relationship. He got along with my friends, and we had so many similar interests. Unfortunately, things were not good for long. The cruelty did not start immediately. It started slowly, little by little. First, it was constant texting. Then, it was constantly FaceTiming me so he could visibly see where I was, what I was doing, or who I was with. It became telling me what to wear, where to go, who to talk to, who I had to remove from social media, what pictures to delete. I thought that this behavior was normal, that it came with this new territory. As mentioned before, this was my first real relationship. This must be what it's like. The media also normalized this behavior, and still does. It is in television, movies, music, and all over social media. Men and women alike are encouraged to act crazy and possessive over their significant others. It is seen as funny and relatable. But living through it wasn't funny. Our relationship was marked early on by dishonesty and infidelity. He would go out with his friends and tell me that it was just a night with the guys, and I would awake to photos all over social media of the guys with a bunch of women. Sometimes, I would wake up to women messaging me, telling me that he had flirted with them or asked for their phone numbers. When I confronted him, he lied each time and would manipulate me into believing him over them. He would call them crazy and make up lies about the women in order to take away their credibility.
The first time that he got physical with me was 6 months into our relationship. I caught him cheating and he lost his temper with me. He shoved me and wouldn't allow me to leave his house. Once he had calmed down, he got down on his knees and begged for my forgiveness. He told me that he was broken, that he didn't know any better, that he needed me. So I forgave him. I felt like I had to fix him and fix the childhood abuse that he had endured and witnessed as a child. I went back. He had told me very early on about his childhood. 2 weeks into us dating, he had broken down into tears discussing his upbringing in a household filled with abuse. Little did I know, this was planting seeds so that I would excuse his future abusive behavior. He began to accuse me of things that he had made up in his head. Usually, they were accusations of me cheating on him. These accusations were not backed by anything at all. He blamed them on gut feelings or dreams he had, or the way I looked at a stranger in the supermarket, or someone he had seen on social media. He would wake me up in the middle of the night with these accusations, refusing to let me sleep. He would continue to press me or hurt me over these accusations, and sometimes I would have to falsely admit to them to get the behavior to stop. It became much worse each time he put his hands on me. Once because I hadn't gotten my oil changed. How dare I forget to go to the mechanic on time? Once because there were guys at the freshman college orientation event that I had attended. How dare I be breathing the same air as someone of the opposite sex? Once because my phone died during the night and I didn't respond at 3 a.m. How dare I not be awake and ready to respond at that hour? Once because I wore a sports bra to a workout class. How dare I? Once because I accidentally made eye contact with a man. How dare I? Once because I was playing games with friends during a ski trip. How dare I? The second to last time I was strangled in my own bed because I refused to buy a plane ticket and fly to Miami the very next day with him. How dare I? I begged and pleaded with him to change. I truly believed that he would. After every incident, things would be okay for a little while. He would apologize profusely, of course, and try to make up for it. Sometimes it was with a good meal. Other times it was with a thoughtful message. Once in a while it was with a gift. The good times would never last, though. It always felt as though I was walking in a minefield. I'd never know when I'd step on a bomb and everything would blow up in my face. I tried to give him ultimatums of reporting the abuse, of getting a restraining order. He told me that, in his words, a restraining order was just a piece of paper, and the things he would do to me would get him the death penalty. I tried many times to get away from him. I tried to break up with him in person. I was left with bruises. I tried to break up with him over the phone. He would break into my house. I tried to get in my car, drive away, and then break up with him. This worked until he started breaking in and taking my cat and leaving with her. He knew that by calling me and forcing me to listen to her helpless meows, I would come back and agree to stay with him. He threatened my family, my pets, my friends, my job, and my education. He broke me down physically and mentally for almost 2 years. He monitored me by logging into my iCloud on his laptop. He would read my messages and go through my photos and notes every day, even multiple times a day. He insulted me and lowered my self-esteem until I didn't even know who I was anymore. He knew that by doing this to me, I would feel as though I needed him. I was manipulated into believing that I deserved the disgusting things that he did to me. I told no one. I lost weight, I lost hair, I lost friends, I lost myself, and most of all, I lost hope that I would ever get away from him alive. And no one knew this. He was so good at hiding his behavior. He was the model citizen. He worked with children. He volunteered in the community. He was well known in his local church and school district. Everyone loved to be around him. He was the life of the party, and my friends and family liked him because they had no idea. I was almost as good as him at hiding it. My friends and family were kept in the dark. I was so embarrassed. I asked myself how I could have gotten into such an awful situation. I couldn't fathom telling anyone when I felt at the time as though I was in the wrong for staying with him. How could I complain about my relationship when I was too afraid to leave? I was filled with shame and guilt. The last day he put his hands on me is burned in my memory forever. We had been on FaceTime as I was walking to class, and I looked up at another student in order to avoid walking into them. He became irate, yelling at me and accusing me of cheating on him for simply looking up at another guy. I did not have the energy to deal with the argument that day, or at all anymore, so I tried to break up with him. I told him we were done and I blocked him. During my class, I was sent hundreds of emails, ranging from pleads to answer him, to threats to come to my classroom and kill me and my classmates, to threats of suicide. The last email was him telling me that he was going back to my house to wait for me so that we could talk. I did not see these emails until my class was almost over, and I walked back to my car so I could take a breath and figure out what to do. Unfortunately, he had broken into my car and was waiting for me in the trunk with a knife. Once I got into the car, I watched in the rearview mirror as he dove through the car towards me. I tried to jump out head first, but he grabbed me by my sweatshirt and pulled me back in. I will never forget the terror that I felt when he held the knife to my throat and told me to drive. I can still feel his fist on my face, beating me mercilessly while I was trying to drive. I remember wondering what would happen if I just crashed the car, because it seemed as if that's what he wanted with the force he was putting into the blows. It was then that I realized that he did not care about his life or mine. It was during this realization that I stopped crying and accepted my death. It was a very serene and peaceful feeling, knowing that I would finally be able to be free from him. I had known all along that this was my only way out, right? This is what I had wanted, to be free. Isn't that so tragic that I was accepting of my death because it was the only way to get away? I hear his voice echoing in my head, telling me that he was going to torture me and murder me in the woods at Harriman State Park, where no one would find me, all because I looked up at a male student in order to avoid walking into the back of him. I have never, and probably will never again, experience such a lack of regard for human life. Once we had arrived at Harriman State Park, he told me that he had thought of a better way to kill me. I started crying again. I had just accepted my fate, and now the plan was changing. The panic started all over again. I kept driving, and he grabbed my phone and told me to call my friend, telling me that if she picked up, he would stab me. Thankfully, she did not answer. He did not hear the phone buzz when she called back. Eventually, we looked up and noticed we were at Woodbury Commons. He had been there previously that week and was told to come back for a new shipment to come in for the item he was looking for. He told me that he wanted to use my money before he killed me. I was to buy him the pair of ski pants that he wanted. I glanced at myself in the rearview mirror. I had a swollen black eye. There was honey all over my hair from when he had gone into the previous day's pumpkin picking bag and taken it to pour it out on me because I was dirty. His hand was also visibly swollen from his assault on my face. I can't go in there looking like this, I told him. He told me to fix it. I tried to put my hair up. There's nothing I can do about my face. How am I supposed to fix that? I asked him. With magic, he said, and the serious look in his eyes chilled me to my core. He told me to park in the spot he was thinking of in his head, otherwise he would stab me. As I drove through the parking lot trying to figure out this riddle, he told me he wanted to kill me so that he was as famous as Ted Bundy, and they made a Netflix show about him too. I parked on a deserted floor of the parking garage, and thankfully it was the right answer. He looked at me and decided that my face was indeed too bad, to go into the store with him. He dumped the contents of my tote bag out into the front passenger seat floorboard and told me to clean it up while he was gone. He found my phone, put it in his pocket, and started to walk away. He turned back towards me. "Do you think I meant to hurt you?" he asked. "Do you think I want a retarded, brain-dead girlfriend?" This was the last thing he ever said to me. He turned and went down the stairs. I waited for a few minutes. What was I going to do? He was planning on coming back to the car, but I knew that he was going to kill me as soon as he did. I was scared. I knew that he was going to find me if I left. I had no way out. I looked down at the stuff on the floor and decided to clean it up so he didn't have another reason to be mad at me when he got back. I noticed my keys on the floor, and I froze. Could I really just leave right now? It was the scariest decision I had to make, knowing I would have to either turn him into the police and see what would happen, or eventually allow him to find me and finish the job. I turned the car on and drove as fast as I could out of the parking garage. I didn't even let myself think until I was out of Woodbury Commons. I drove around the small town until I found the police station. I parked, and I sat there. My thoughts were scattered. Where was he? What was I doing? Where was I going? I had to go to the police. They could help me, but what if they couldn't? What if he found me? I needed him. I couldn't do this to him. I needed to get help. I was going to die if I didn't get help. Was he going to get in trouble? How could I do this to him? He was broken. He didn't know any better. But he did know better. He knew what he was doing. He knew his behavior was wrong this whole time. He knew that it was wrong because he hid it. He knew what he was doing because he apologized. This is what made me finally go into the police station. It couldn't have been more than 30 seconds, but it felt like forever. Getting myself to the police station was terrifying, knowing that he was going to get into a lot of trouble. I did love him. I did feel bad for him. But it was him or me, and I chose me. I walked into the police station with a bruised face and a broken heart, and I told them everything. They rushed out and ushered me into the back, where they immediately sent out officers to find him. My father was called and turned an hour drive into 20 minutes. I was finally safe. I thought I would die that day, but I got away alive. Saving myself was my most difficult accomplishment, but the one of which I am most proud. It took me a while to understand that I did not deserve anything that happened to me. None of it was my fault. I was forced to stay in an abusive relationship out of fear for my life and the lives of those around me. I was a victim at the hands of a monster who wanted full control over my brain and my body, who manipulated me and made me feel as though I was unable to trust my own thoughts, feelings, or memories. That was not love. That's not how you treat someone you love. And it was not up to me to fix him. He knew right from wrong. He was an adult, fully in control of his actions. He knew that this behavior was wrong because he would apologize for it afterwards. And he knew it was wrong because he did everything he could do to hide it. I no longer feel guilty for saving myself because he would have killed me or his next partner. The court proceedings were very scary at first. I felt guilty for a very long time, and I put a lot of pressure on myself to not feel guilty and to push away these emotions. But the only thing that got me through these times were embracing my feelings. My victim witness advocate and the prosecutor were so helpful and explained everything during the court proceedings to my family and me. This helped me more than anything. He was in jail from the day he was arrested to the day he was sentenced, and he was denied bail. In April, he was sentenced to 7 years in prison for first-degree kidnapping. I have never felt as powerful as I did on the day I was able to share my victim impact statement in front of him, making it clear that he would never be able to gain control over me again. I am so grateful and lucky that I received closure and was believed and protected by the criminal justice system. I know that not everyone is as lucky, but talking about domestic violence is the only way to create change. Since that day, I have worked tirelessly to avoid letting him take any more from me. But still, a traumatic event like the one I endured takes a tremendous toll on a person. I was diagnosed with PTSD. I suffer from panic attacks, flashbacks, and nightmares from which I wake up crying. My anxiety is debilitating some days, and I don't want to do anything except crawl up into my bed. I find public spaces draining, as my hypervigilance does not allow me to feel as though I am safe unless I am at home or with a loved one. I have had to work extremely hard to alter my brain processes and thought patterns because he worked hard to make me believe that I was worthless and unsafe. I had to relearn how to live again. I had to relearn how to interact with people. The hardest thing for me to relearn was how to make eye contact when I spoke to people. Yet still, I'm here. I have the most amazing support system, which is the main reason I am where I am today. Through their strength, I found my own. I continued working and I stayed in nursing school. I completed my minor in psychology 2 springs ago. I am currently in my senior year and I graduate in May. I completed a nurse externship this summer at a local hospital and now work there as a patient care technician. I share my story to raise awareness for domestic violence and to inspire others to find the strength to leave similar situations. I create content on social media to reach people across the world. I speak at schools to educate students on toxic warning behaviors and to remind them that they are not alone. I recognize Domestic Violence Awareness Month by, for the second time, running a 5K to raise funds for an organization in South Jersey that provides resources for those who are experiencing domestic violence. I also volunteer with the Office of Violence Prevention at Ramapo to make my campus a safe place. I am so glad that I shared my story because I have helped and inspired hundreds of people leave abusive relationships, confide in their friends and family about their experiences with domestic violence, go to therapy, or report their abusers. My journey of advocacy is filled with ups and downs. I have many online haters and trolls who insult me and belittle my experience. For a little while, it really affected me. But one day, I decided I was better than that. How could I be so easy to take these negative comments by anonymous users to heart when I have the most vulnerable and traumatic thing that could ever happen to me on display for the whole world to see? I was more than that. And from that day forward, I have remained unaffected by senseless hate and invalid criticism. The positive feedback from sharing my story outweighs any possible negatives anyway. I know that I'm helping people and breaking the cycle for this generation, the previous one, and the next. I'm enjoying life, living every day as if it were my last. I have become closer than ever with my parents, who have done everything they possibly could to make me feel safe and loved at home. I have made so many amazing friends, and I have a wonderful boyfriend who treats me like gold and is so patient and gentle with me. He has taught me to trust, and he has taught me what real love is. He has held my hand while I saved myself. I am so happy to finally be loved the way I should be, truly loved for the outgoing, funny, intelligent, resilient, and beautiful person that I am. Domestic violence can happen to anyone, anywhere, at any time. Pay attention and know the warning signs to protect yourselves and your loved ones. We need to break the silence. We need to listen and believe those who are asking for help and share their stories. Working together and advocating for awareness of interpersonal violence is the only way we will end it. If you are experiencing any form of interpersonal violence, please know that we believe you. We hear you, we support you, and there are so many resources available for you in the community when you are ready to speak up. There is so much love and joy waiting for you on the other side. You are worthy of living and loving on your own terms. I am a survivor. I will never stop sharing my story in order to advocate not only for myself, but for those who have not been able to quite yet, and also for those who no longer have a voice. Thank you.
Lex, I have a question.
Sure.
I can't even imagine the moment you're in the car with the offender and how you managed in that moment of fight or flight to not panic, to stay calm, to stay cool, to stay collected, and ultimately to save yourself and become your own hero before you became a hero for everyone here tonight. Can you please describe for us what that was like in that moment?
So, as I explained, I was obviously very scared. I had really realized that he didn't care about my life, and he also didn't care about his life. And I feel like that's one of the worst, most dangerous things that someone can experience, when someone is so full of violence and aggression that they don't even care about their own life. Like, I knew I was definitely in danger. And like I said, for a while I had just accepted that I was going to die, and that was okay because I was going to finally get away from him. But when I saw that I had a chance to escape, I knew that even if it came back to bite me and even if he came after me, I had to try. I owed myself that much.
And if you have one message that you could give to people watching and listening tonight who are right now trapped in a similar situation and a similar situation to the one that you were in, what would that advice be?
You are so much stronger than you think. And I know it is so scary to not only try to leave because it's dangerous, but because you love this person and you care about them and you can't imagine your life without them. I promise that you are worthy of so much more. And once the time is right, you will be able to get out.
Thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
It's our honor to have you.
Thank you.
Panelists, please take your seats on stage.
Bye, everyone.
Please enter the stage on this side. I believe if there's one word that could accurately describe the incredible story we just heard from Alexis, it's courage. It's courage. It's courage. And what I take from that story is that every survivor has that courage within themselves. And it's so important to come to that self-realization that you can also be your own hero. And you can also save yourself long before you step forward with the courage that Lex displayed to become an advocate and save and help others. This symposium was created for you, for survivors, because you're the face of change and you are the difference. It's not about us. We're not the most important people here, you are. This is your symposium. I'm the Milford Councilman Matthew Seymour, and now our panel discussion begins. It's truly an honor to again welcome our esteemed panelists and agencies here tonight to share their wealth of knowledge, experience, and insight into such a sensitive topic. I would like to make everyone aware, for those who are not yet aware of the fact that there are pages with QR codes on them. If you scan the QR code with your phone, there's an option to ask a question. You can also request that your question be answered by your panelist of preference. You just heard Lex's story. I would encourage you now, as we proceed with our discussion, to begin to submit your questions, so that at the end of our program, we can answer as many as possible. I truly wish it were a fait accompli that everyone here knew what domestic violence is. Unfortunately, some people do not. We're joined tonight by Allison Bressler from Partnership for Change. Allison, could you please inform those watching and listening, both here and at home, what is intimate partner violence?
Thank you, Matt. Simply put, domestic violence is a pattern of behavior that instills fear of negative consequences through the use of power and control. Now, people think they understand that, and what they really don't understand is that if you are not doing what you want, if you're not going where you want, if you're not expressing yourself the way you want, spending the way you want, have friendships with who you want, if you're not realistically living your life the way you want because you're fearful that there's going to be a negative consequence from your partner, then you're likely being abused in your relationship. Most people don't understand that because they think that's a relationship sometimes. But what we need to understand is if there's a consistent pattern of fear and loss of power within that relationship, I don't have to be scared I'm going to get hit. I can be scared I'm going to get ignored for the next week. I can be scared I'm going to get raged at, put down, made fun of, have my access to funds taken from me, things in general taken from me. Whatever that negative consequence is that you're fearing that is keeping you from being autonomous or doing what you want to do, then you're likely being abused in your relationship.
And in the story that we heard, obviously, from Lex, her first point of contact was law enforcement for help. She reached out to first responders. She called the police, she called 911, she did everything right. Actually, she went to the police department directly. I'm going to ask Assistant Prosecutor Vera Dodoni, who is the chief of the Bergen County Prosecutor's Office Domestic Violence Unit, if you would please walk us through what a survivor should expect upon making that call and what the next steps would be towards getting protection.
Thank you, Matt. Hello, everyone. Good evening. So when a victim of domestic violence comes to the police department to report a crime that is committed against her, the first thing that is going to happen at the police department is going to be a statement that's going to be taken from her, and I'm using her, although it could be him. There are situations where we have male victims as well. The police department will take a statement from the victim, and at that point will draw charges if charges are appropriate. And the charges, and I want to really elaborate on what Allison said about, from a legal perspective, in New Jersey, crimes, there is no per se law or domestic violence crime. We have numerous crimes in the books that are designated domestic violence if the offender is an intimate partner or a household member, and there are definitions that give us that designation of domestic violence. And so when a victim is reporting that and the police department do believe that a domestic violence act occurred, they will draw up charges. And at that point, it will come, if there are indictable charges, felony charges, they will come to the Bergen County Prosecutor's Office. And at that point, the office, the domestic violence unit, which is myself and 4 other prosecutors, will handle that case and take it from there. And we will obviously be in communication with the police department. We would obtain all the evidence. We will meet with the victim. we will tender plea offers to the defense, and then from there, if no plea offers are accepted, we will go to trial, and we will strive to get a conviction post-trial. So if that answers your question.
It does, but I have a follow-up question for you. So if the victim comes to you to prosecute, for example, an assault, is your office going to provide that survivor with a protective order, or should that survivor also go to a different court, such as family court, to seek a family court restraining order? And what would be the difference?
So that's a very good question. So when the victim survivor comes to the police department, that's really why also domestic violence laws are, why we have domestic violence laws. It's because we want to protect the victim. We want to offer services for the victim. And the services include, obviously, the victim services that we have for counseling and therapy, but beyond that is her right to seek a restraining order. And every victim of domestic violence will be asked by a police officer, do you want a restraining order? And if the answer is yes, she will get on the phone with the judge, and the judge will determine whether a restraining order should be issued. If a restraining order is issued, then the victim will be protected. That will be served on the offender, and the victim, it will provide the victim a measure of protection. And I know Alexis spoke earlier about, it's the boyfriend, her ex-boyfriend, used the terminology, this is just a piece of paper. And yes, it's just a piece of paper, but it provides protection, and to the extent that we can protect the victim that way, we do, because a violation of that restraining order will add charges to the offender, the charges of contempt, and any type of violation of the order. That is one way to obtain a no-contact order by getting a restraining order. But also, once the case comes to the prosecutor's office, or once the defendant gets arrested, a condition of release that usually gets placed is a no-contact order. So judges will issue a no-contact order as a condition of release. And now the victim will have both a no-contact order and a temporary restraining order, and that is a measure of protection that is available to her in among many others that as the case progresses through the criminal justice system.
Thank you. And for more on this topic, I'm going to ask Savi Dara, who's a municipal prosecutor in the borough of North Arlington, who views prosecution from a different perspective as a municipal prosecutor. What can a survivor do who doesn't have the black eye, who doesn't have the bruise, who doesn't have the physical, very noticeable indicia of an assault? How can that survivor be believed?
Thank you, Matt. So first thing I would tell a victim is keep all your text messages, keep the photos, don't erase anything, and if you can send a copy of everything to a trusted friend or family member, please do that in case you lose your phone or your information gets wiped. And something that you should do outside of municipal court is contact an attorney, either domestic violence attorney, whether it's in private practice like me, or my friend and colleague sitting to my left here, Carol Weissman, who's with Northeast New Jersey Legal Services. The reason that a victim should do that is because courts are intimidating places. They're intimidating places for seasoned attorneys and legal professionals and judges and advocates like you see sitting up here. So I imagine they're 10 times more intimidating for somebody who's not familiar with the legal system and with the justice system and how things work, and the concept of a domestic violence incident could lead you to dealing with 3 different courts. The criminal courts, like Prosecutor Adoni just spoke about, family courts, like a domestic violence restraining order would have you dealing with, and municipal court, where I'm a municipal prosecutor. Because if criminal charges result as a result of the defendant having charges pressed against them, sometimes the county prosecutor will downgrade them to municipal court, and then a victim and their attorney might be speaking with me, at which case they can still pursue criminal charges against the perpetrator, but just speak to an attorney so they can help you gather your thoughts, organize your proofs, and move forward in the system. That's sometimes a mystified process even for us professionals.
In real fast and add
Yes.
to that, just to piggyback on that, I think what everyone should also know is that every one of the prosecutor's office for every county has victim witness advocates that are absolutely wonderful and trained to be there to support you, to explain the legal process so that you don't have to feel like you're doing this alone. I think another thing to be aware of, and by the way, obviously ADV, Women's Rights Information Service, Center for Hope and Safety, these are your direct service people that can also provide the advocacy and the legal support that anybody needs. So it can be very daunting to go into that courtroom. I think what's also really important when you're speaking to the judge, and I'm sure any of the judges would agree, it's so important to articulate your fear. It's very important to be as articulate as you can in explaining as in much detail. But the biggest suggestion I would always make, and I cannot stress this enough, if you're getting a restraining order, make sure you have a safety plan as well. Don't work in a vacuum and say, okay, well, I have a restraining order, I'm fine. Make sure that you have systems and support set up and understand that working with an advocate who can explain to you in detail and prepare you with a specific safety plan that works for you, that could change the name of the game in keeping you as safe as possible.
And I want to get to that point in a minute, but before I do, and thank you for bringing that very important issue to the forefront. We're also joined tonight by retired Superior Court Judge Terry Paul Bottinelli. Judge, I don't mean to put you on the spot, but I'm going to ask you a difficult question on purpose because you heard so many hearings for final restraining order applications. What happens when there's a restraining order in place? It's in place, and the offender finds alternative ways to continue to contact the victim. Blocked phone numbers, burner phones, alternative social media accounts, and it isn't always an easy thing to prove or connect those numbers and those accounts with the offender.
Matt, thank you. Unfortunately, there are too many matters involving domestic violence. We had over 3,000 cases last year in Bergen County Superior Court. It's gotten to the point where Judge Catunio, who is the assignment judge, has 3 judges assigned to do domestic violence. There are 10 judges doing all the family matters in Bergen County. So we always make sure that there are folks that are available who are well informed and knowledgeable about domestic violence. One of the things I was kind of shocked about after I started my first domestic violence inquiry was I was in municipal court in an adjacent municipality, and it was the first day I was on the bench. And I was like, oh God, now what? Well, during a period of time, it takes some seasoning and takes some education and takes some knowledge about the cycle of domestic violence. And is this request for a restraining order, is it because there's a history between these folks of domestic contretemps, where one says, oh, I want a restraining order. The other one says, oh yeah, well, I want a restraining order, and they go back and forth. It's a problem. When we talk about using telephones and having a restraining order and how you get around the restraining order, you should be aware that there are programs, especially one that's called spoofing, in which you can go on the internet and you can send a message. It makes it look like it's from a telephone that is not the one that's your own, or an email. It's not your email. That can be sent to a person who can be a victim of harassment. So it's really important that if someone does get a message, do a screenshot. If you do get telephone calls, keep the recording. Because any system, there's always ways that people are going to try to beat the system. Spoofing is one of them, and one of the problems that we have in sitting on the bench and making the decisions, we have to decide whether or not this has been authenticated. Is this truly from the person who is purported to be sending the information? So, Matt, the short part of that is there is no one answer. For every time you get somebody who is been charged with an offense, there's always someone who's trying to figure out a way to beat it. The domestic violence statutes were enacted, and they are continually the law is continually evolving. Almost, I would say very infrequently does a day go by where we do not have case law coming down from the appellate court in which domestic violence is addressed. For domestic violence, we have certain safeguards to prevent abuse. Are they infallible? Absolutely not. But it's the efforts that are being made to give protection to people who are in need of protection, whether it's through harassment, whether it's through cyber harassment laws. Some of these are really easier, as we heard from the prosecutor. I mean, you go to the prosecutor's office to file a complaint, you're talking about criminal charges. You're talking about assault. You're talking about violence. You're talking about speaking with the police officers about this. Well, sometimes people don't want to go to the police. They're afraid of going to the police. Are there other ways of getting a restraining order? Sure. During the court day, we have hearing officers that are available to talk with folks who are looking for a restraining order. We have Superior Court judges that are available to address whether or not the standard of proof, which is more likely than not, or what's called a preponderance, does it warrant the issuance of a temporary restraining order? And that temporary restraining order will have to be demonstrated at a point in the future once the defendant, whether it's a male or a woman, has been served with the papers alleging domestic violence. Your proofs, when you go for, in connection with domestic violence, more likely than not, you go to a criminal charge, has got to be proved beyond a reasonable doubt. It's much more difficult. So, is it a perfect system? No. Is it evolving? Yes. Are we cognizant of the plight of victims of domestic violence? Absolutely. Are there people who abuse the system and trying to get the upper hand by making up stories about how bad the other person is in order to try to get the upper hand in custody? It happens, which is why we've got to make sure we have these type of symposia and people can realize that the courts are there to adjudicate matters. The courts are there with an understanding of humanity. You cannot leave your humanity out of this, but you also have to be aware that not every allegation of domestic violence is domestic violence. So I don't want to talk about the proofs, Matt, because that really gets into this kind of heavy. Hope I answered your question.
You did, and to follow up on what you had said, I'm going to go back to Ms. Adoni for a moment. Judge, you mentioned police and infallibility. You mentioned how our systems are, unfortunately, don't always work. Sometimes they fail. Ms. Adoni, what can a survivor do when the systems in place that are designed and put in place specifically to protect victims and survivors fail? What should victims and survivors do when law enforcement fails to do its job, when our systems fail to do its job, when our service providers fail to do their jobs, and our whole system fails a victim. How should a victim in those instances get help and protection that they need?
So I want to talk about why the system may fail, because the question would be like, why would it fail? And yes, sometimes it fails because we don't have the proofs, or it sounds very cold, because when a victim comes to a police department and says, I've been abused or I've been beaten, or sometimes we need proof, we need something to go by. And yes, the victim's word is worth a lot, and we offer them the options of signing complaints if we're not able to corroborate what they say, but it sometimes does not get far in the criminal justice system because the proofs fail. And in those scenarios, I always say that seeking a restraining order, because a restraining order, the burden is lower than proving a criminal case against a defendant. In order to prove a criminal case against a defendant, we need to prove beyond a reasonable doubt. A restraining order, the burden is much lower. So we always suggest to obtain a restraining order. If that doesn't work, to obtain services, and we have our victim witness advocates in our office. They are tremendous in the ways they can assist victims of domestic violence by giving them the various services and groups to turn to for help as to what to do, how to get away from an abuser, where to go. All those are facilitated by our victim witness and by the various agencies that are sitting right here. And so it does not always, a victim of domestic violence is a victim regardless of whether there are criminal charges. I think that that's why we have domestic violence laws, to offer that to victims. And so that's what I would do, to turn to the wonderful agencies we have in the county for help, and perhaps they can guide the victim in those cases.
And you mentioned the lesser burden of proof, that it's easier to get a family part restraining order. So I'm going to ask Carl Weissman, who joins us tonight as the director of Northeast New Jersey Legal Services, which offers pro bono legal services to domestic violence survivors. Ms. Weissman, how would you guide a survivor in the family court to obtain a restraining order, emergent support for a child, other emergent financial relief, and perhaps other forms of emergency support from our courts?
Okay, thank you, Matt. So I think it's important, we've been all talking here about pursuing and going through. I commend the speaker tonight. She did the hardest thing that anyone can do, and that's actually taking that step to go for help. There are so many times that nothing will happen until you take that first step. And so what we advise, especially in legal services, if you're going to do it through the legal system, that you first, as has been explained here, file for the restraining order either through the police, or you can walk into the courts, as the judge has said, to obtain that restraining order. When you obtain the restraining order, you're not only necessarily going for prohibitions against contact with the other person or coming to their house. There is relief available in the initial applications. You can ask for child support. You can ask for payment of rent. You can ask to have prohibitions against parenting time if the children are at risk. It's important to make that start to go through the legal system. And that's step one. The second step will be actually to go through the hearing, as Judge Bottinelli has explained to you. But I think what's really important in going through this system, in order to go through the legal system, as Assistant Prosecutor Doney said, is to get the additional help, because you need the support of these agencies to give you the psychological and safety planning, because you're not sure where that restraining order hearing is going to go in the end. Keep your proofs definitely intact, keep them in a safe place, but to have the safety plan, and then the system will go and work itself through the courts. There'll be a hearing where the information has to be presented to the judge. Witnesses should be brought in then, and that is how you can get your restraining order for the domestic violence cases as well. And hopefully that will be a positive result.
And Ms. Weissman, are there protections available for victims who are not otherwise in a dating relationship for a family apart restraining order? And if so, what are those remedies?
So we've been talking in the context of what is known as quote-unquote domestic violence. Those are cases where dating relationships, family relationships, married spouses, people have a child in common. There's what I call the little sister, so to speak, of the Domestic Violence Act, which is the act that now protects individuals in cases where there is absolutely no type of relation like that. It could be people that are familiar with each other in settings such as students at a college, employers and employees, your neighbors, and it's the Victim Assistance Protection Act. And under that act, you can file similarly as you would for a restraining order in cases where there are sexual, criminal contact, sexual assault, lewdness, or attempts of those, or you can also file for cyber harassment or harassment, which those last two areas have been broadened. So it's no longer an act that only protects the domestic relationships. It's been expanded, and we also would recommend that if you're in that type of a relationship and you are it's a neighbor, it's an employer, you can have the ability now to file, and you would file it similarly as you would for a restraining order. The only difference is you have to either do it online or go to the court to do that, and that's only during the weekdays right now, but there is alternative relief. Hopefully that answers your question.
It does, and thank you. And I'd just like to pivot for a moment because the importance of planning a path to safety was brought up earlier. So I'm going to turn for a moment to Marissa Hellick, who is the Division Director of Bergen County Alternatives to Domestic Violence. Ms. Hellick, could you please speak not only to the services that your agency provides to protect and assist and help survivors, but what type of safety planning services could be offered?
Thank you. I appreciate the question. And I just wanted to circle back for a moment, if I can, when we talk about, what do we do with system failure, and, what does that look like? And that's a very real reality. It's just last week we got a call from a survivor who, English is not the first language, and they had trouble filing a report, at a police station. So that's real. It's not the same. It's not the same everywhere, right? There's those. I have to get away from calling them the ugly isms that exist in the world, but those are there, right? We're talking about racism. We're talking about sexism, homophobia. So really, how you present what that identity looks like outward facing is really going to be so impactful of how you're going to be treated, and that's real. And that's what I appreciate about the symposium, about having these conversations, because we're not covering that up here. We're willing partners to grow, to improve, and that's why this coordinated community response is everything, because yes, we fail, but the more of us that have skin in the game, that have an interest, that are informed and are educated, the less failure our survivors we're all going to face. Because as Prosecutor Masella said earlier, right on, and it hit me so hard. It's not just happening to that victim. This speaks about our community. This speaks about significant issues within our community that we all have to work together to resolve. It's not on Lex. It's not on anyone. It's not on Danielle, who shared her story last year. The burden isn't on that individual survivor. It's on all of us here together. And we have tremendous partners here in Bergen County, but we would be foolish to say that we're perfect. but we're showing up and we're listening and we're learning. So back to your question, and I'm sorry, Matt, as far as alternatives to domestic violence, and there's other agencies that perform and support in the same way, Women's Rights Information, Center for Hope and Safety, Partnership for Change. But at ADV, we offer 24/7 crisis intervention. You know, and sometimes that could be a little scary. Some folks go, gosh, I don't know if I want to call that hotline. Call. You don't have to be in the car fleeing away. You don't have to be locked in a bathroom. You could just wanting to know a little information. You know, so please, I encourage you. So immediately we would work with you on crisis intervention, and we would offer you safety planning. So we really work with you to figure out, gosh, how do we keep you safe as you access your next goal and your next step with us? So we're here for you during that ride, but in with it at ADV and with all of our partners up here, we understand again that the burden is not on the survivor, not on the victim, it's on all of us to become educated. So we go into communities, we hold symposiums like this so that we could all learn, look for those warning signs, so that again, the burden to act is not on that survivor, it's on all of us as a community.
If I could just follow up, Patrick, what would your suggestion be to a survivor in the situation that Ms. Hellick is describing, where the survivor feels the system has failed? How can we as a community and as community stakeholders help that individual get help?
Yeah, so, okay, yeah, good. I was just thinking about this, thank you, Matt. I was just thinking about this. I'm going to paraphrase something, an author, there's a book, No Visible Bruises. I'm sure people have heard about it. If you haven't, you should definitely read it. It's essentially a journalist examining the United States and how we address domestic violence in different communities. And one of her, the summation of that is, part of the psychology of an abusive relationship is that the abuser has to convince the victim that they are more powerful than the system designed to protect her. And then when I was listening to Alexis' story, I was thinking, there was a lot. There's so much in her story, and I think we should all just make sure that we take some time to process everything that she was saying and what we could learn from it. But one thing that really stood out, and it was a passing phrase that she said that I'm not going to forget, which was trying to figure out this riddle, when she was talking about the parking garage, trying to figure out this riddle. And so much of that negotiating safety is what a survivor does in isolation. And tonight, so far, what we've heard is so much of experts talking about their process. And what I hope we can do in the coming year is turn this from linear processes inward, where we could all get together and examine the processes, appreciate what's working, but certainly address what's not.
Thank you. And I just want to take a moment, a pause, because tonight is unique and special for many reasons. One of which is this is the first time in our program's history that we have the previous year's survivor here, as well as the current year's survivor. It's also special because Ms. Sharples is New Milford's own. Ms. Sharples, I would ask you, as a fellow survivor, now advocate, how did you negotiate safety in your relationship that you described last year, and what's your reaction to the story you heard from Alexis earlier tonight?
So the way I found safety was I refused to always ever be alone with either of my boyfriends at the time. The first boyfriend that used to, if you guys didn't see the Symposium last year, I had two separate boyfriends. One that used to hit me for fun, and the second one who stalked me all the time, and kind of just like Alexis' story, where he had to know where she was at all times. She always had to FaceTime him. Mine was the same way, but even if I was sitting in a Taco Bell parking lot, I had to send the video of it because I don't understand why I can't eat tacos. But in order to be safety, I always made sure I had a friend with me. I always made sure the doors were never closed. I always made sure that regardless of where I am and what I'm doing, one of my friends had my location. Because before I found out on iPhones that you can share your locations, Snapchat was really big. and it would have all the maps of your friends, and I would always share it with all of my friends. It got to the point where I needed my mother to know where I was at all times and where I was going and who I was with. And if that plan changed or my phone was going to die, I made sure that my mother had another friend's phone number with me. Because the more I was alone with them, the more they had a chance of doing anything. Even if we went to a party and I saw that my first boyfriend would get so intoxicated where he would black out and hit me for fun, I made sure that when it was crossing that point, that for some reason I had to make sure I had to go. I made sure I had to leave. No matter, even if I was having fun, I always made sure there was a safe place for me to get to. I would either say, oh, we ran out of snacks, or we need more soda, let me go to the store. And I would make sure one of my friends that he trusted would drive me home so I wouldn't be alone with them. If that answers your question.
It does. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Of course.
And what about situations for survivors when, as in many cases, there's overlapping areas of concern, and in particular, sexual violence and sexual assault? We're joined also tonight by Healing Space. Healing Space is a part of the YWCA, and one of the top agencies, not only in Bergen County, but in the state, that provides services to victims and survivors of sexual assault. Would you please speak to what your agency can do to help a survivor?
All right, thank you, Matt. So at Healing Space, we are Bergen County's, again, Sexual Violence Resource Center. So we do a lot to support folks that are dealing with sexual violence. All our services are free and confidential, right? So some of those services are things like one-on-one therapy, support groups, and many different types of support groups. Because again, we have many different bases to cover. So things like folks that are in the LGBTQ plus community. We have one of the only men's group that also deals with sexual violence in New Jersey, actually. We have a group for families, different things, right? Because we try to cover these different bases. We also have a 24/7 crisis hotline as well, which anyone could call. And you can call if you're in crisis, of course, but you can also call if you, again, just want information or someone to talk to. If you want to get more clarification on your situation and if it could be sexual violence or it might not be, things like that. So we always encourage people to definitely call if they have any type of questions or need support. We also have legal advocacy. We are a part of with our hotline, we're a part of the START team, which is the sexual assault response team. And we do accompaniments to hospitals, right? So if someone is dealing with sexual violence, they let us know. And so we go there or one of the confidential sexual violence advocates goes there, and they pretty much help provide emotional support. They're there for that person as an advocate. They work with the prosecutor's office, but they also work with the forensic nurse, and they just try to support that person through the process of collecting evidence, potentially filing a claim, doing whatever they have to do in that moment. And of course, we at Healing Space, we try to just empower that person, and once again let them know that this is all something that they have the power to do, and if they don't want to do it in that moment, they don't have to, right? Because some people, it might be a lot for them to continuously retell their story, or even in that moment want to go and prosecute whoever it is that assaulted them and things like that. And yeah, we just continue to find ways and just, again, support and be there for folks that are dealing with sexual violence. And as Matt mentioned, there is a lot of overlap, once again, so folks that could be dealing with domestic violence, could be dealing with sexual violence, things of that nature, but we try to work a lot with ADV and different folks in the community to, again, help those different points and aspects that might be plaguing that person or that survivor that's dealing with all these different things. And again, as Marissa mentioned earlier as well, there's other aspects as well that just come to define who that person is and how they could be going through the situation in a very unique way. Again, someone that is a part of the LGBTQ plus community, someone that is a part of a minority, might not get these services in the same way or get the support in the same way that someone else might. So all these things are important to put together and to, again, be able to support people in the best way we can. But yeah, that's what Healing Space does. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us tonight. We really appreciate the services that each agency provides, because each agency helps put together an important piece of the puzzle, the big picture of which is protection and help. We're also joined tonight by Lil Corcoran. Lil Corcoran is the executive director of the Women's Rights Information Center, which is one of New Jersey's most long-standing centers to offer assistance across the board for survivors. The Women's Rights Center is based in Englewood and is a hub for people who need help and protection. Ms. Corcoran, could you please speak to what help a survivor can get who needs housing, who needs therapy, who needs counseling, and need other forms of support beyond just the legal realm?
I'm so glad you asked that question. I always love it when I'm on a panel with a lot of legal people, and I'm like, oh my God. Let me just say this, what Women's Rights Information Center does, and I had a long history working in the battered women's shelter for 25 years, and then I got here, so just old. So just know that. I've been around doing domestic violence work for 34 years. So I've seen the progression, and things get better and things get worse, and sometimes it feels like it's getting better, and then we swing back, and it can get very discouraging. So Alexis' story was very compelling. A lot of the issues today that, when I first started, we weren't dealing with cell phones and Snapchats and whatever, there's just other ways now that people who want to be nefarious can decide that they're going to jump in and be abusive. I want to say this, at the Women's Center, we get 50 to 60 calls per month of survivors of some form of domestic violence or intimate personal violence, 50 to 60 new calls a month. That's not to mention the ones that we're trying to help that called us last month. I would like to say that probably the vast majority of those folks are not even getting into the legal system. They're not getting into your offices. They're not getting into your courtrooms. They're definitely not going to the police. Sometimes the police get involved, but there's not enough time to get into how that happens. But I will just tell you that the vast majority are not taking advantage of what's available to them for many, many, many reasons. I think that's important for people maybe listening and people listening on the streaming app, that if you don't wind up in front of this nice guy over here, the judge or the prosecutor, it doesn't mean that you don't have issues that we can help you with. What I've noticed with working with survivors for almost 30 years at this point, 25, 30 years, maybe longer, I don't even know. I've lost track of how old I am. Matt, tell me how long have I been doing this? 29, thank you. He can do math too, thank you. Is that survivors, first, there's so many layers of what they go through, but what they first need to do is reduce their isolation. They don't know they're isolated. No one gets up and says, I'm never gonna call my mother again, I'm never gonna call my friend Allison again, I'm not gonna call any of my friends. No one wakes up one day and decides to cut off all their supports. It happens slowly, over time, in an abusive relationship where they start to give up those things and they don't even realize they're giving it up. By the time they get to us, they're very isolated, alone, thinking they're the only one, also thinking, I must be an idiot that I've put up with this for so long. So I really think the biggest thing we can offer is you're not crazy. This was almost calculated out. It's almost like a brainwashing. And now you're realizing you were brainwashed, and we're going to get you back to what you used to be, but it's going to take some time. And the first thing I think we need to do is connect you with other people like Lex and ADV and some of my other friends here to say, you're not crazy and you're not alone. When I'm hearing stories, sometimes a lawyer will call me and start telling me, or a therapist will start telling me the story, and they'll say, do you know this client? I'm like, no, but I know this client, because the story is exactly the same. The pattern's almost exactly the same. So when a victim or a survivor hears that from another victim or survivor, they feel less guilty or less stupid, and gives them a little more strength to take the next step. So one of the things I want to tell you is Women's Rights Information Center does a lot of, and we work with men too, about 20% of our clients are men, so don't be fooled by the name. We were named in 1973. We are a women's center, but we want to help everybody. We're bleeding hearts, what can I tell you? We want to help everybody. We do have online support groups. If you go on my website, womensrightsinformation.org, I almost forgot the name of my website. We have an intake form, and if you fill it out, someone will get back to you, right? And it's confidential, it only goes to us. But also on my website is a calendar of online support groups that you can register for and go to if you're a survivor. They're women's support groups. I will help the men, and we'll talk about that with ADV. They do a lot more with men who've been abused. We help men as well, but in terms of our support groups, they're women-centered right now. If you want to come and work for me, I'm open to a male group. Yeah, we'll talk later.
It's a different group.
I'm going to steal everybody's staff that I like here. Just come work for me. I also want to tell you about something else that's kind of interesting. We do case management with housing and legal, and we call Northeast Legal Services, and we call everybody. We call the prosecutor's office. We do all the advocacy. We'll do all of that too. But I really want to emphasize that we do a lot of supports. We have a trauma therapy program where we have if you are a woman survivor, every first and third Tuesday of the month at the Bergen Equestrian Center, we do equine therapy for survivors, and it's open. It's like a AA meeting, right? A support group. It's an open support group where you can come in and you're sitting around with a bunch of women and horses, and you say, yeah, that happened to me too. Yeah, that happened to me too. And all of a sudden you start to feel less isolated. I think that's so important. If you're watching this and you're wondering, get educated and get less isolated. Find out that you are not the only one. And unfortunately, if I'm getting 60 calls a month, and I'm just one agency in Bergen County, it's out there. This is happening. You know, what do we have, 70 some odd towns in this county? It's happening in every town. I don't care if you're talking about Alpine or Garfield. It's happening in every town. So anyway, I don't even know if I answered your question, Matt.
You did, but I'm going to go back to you again to follow up. You're talking about isolation. What is the impact of isolation on the mental health of a survivor, and what can survivors do to help cope and heal and recover from that trauma?
Well, there's so much you can do, but I think really, honestly, you know, so let me tell you this. I was a college professor for a while. I used to do a 40-hour training on domestic violence and run out of time. So I could talk forever about this. I have a million answers. When you ask a question like that, I'm like, I could go anywhere. So call me sometime if you want more information. But I will tell you this. I think, number one, find someone you trust. The worst thing you can do is tell someone this happened to you and start getting the judgments. Well, why did you stay with him? Why did you put up with that? I would never put up with that. Boy, if he did that to me, I would have been gone. If you get that response, you got to find someone like me or some of my friends here to talk to, because first thing you need to be is not judged. You're not an idiot. You are a victim. So reducing isolation is number one. Getting educated is number two. And then we have specialized treatment therapies for survivors of all kinds of trauma. You know, it's funny, there's been, not funny, but interesting to me that there's a lot of research now about PTSD, and we often associate that now with vets. But if you think about the fact that 1 in 4 women have been abused, I'd say there's a lot of women walking around with PTSD, and it's undiagnosed because we don't think about it that way. So one of the groups that we do, this is not the open group I was describing, but I also do equine and EMDR groups, which is a closed group. You have to get into it because that's a therapy group, unlike a support group. Remember I said my first support group is more like AA, it's open, you can kind of come. The therapy group is a closed group so that we can really get deeper into the issues, and we're finding really good success. I'm hopeful that we keep some data on pre and post tests on measuring how people were doing coming in and how when they finish treatment, and it's very encouraging, but we're not researchers, right? So I'm trying to work with some colleges, local universities, to actually take the data that I have and turn it around. There's good research out there that these methods work with trauma. I'd like to see the research on how it works with sexual violence, domestic violence, intimate partner violence. So that's my next hope if I live long enough to do it. Again, did I answer your question?
You did.
I'm very tangential.
Well. You always do. But I have the same question for Patrick. Patrick, same question.
Sorry, can you repeat the question just a second? I was listening to Lil.
Of course. We're talking about the impact, not just of abuse, but of the isolation component of abuse on the mental health of survivors and victims. Can you speak to that? And in addition, please, to how can victims in those situations and paradigms get help?
Okay, so with this, 'cause I want to be clear. So my role at ADV is I'm the Abuse Intervention Program Supervisor. So I work with the offenders of the abuse, and I could talk at length about that. Similar to Lil, and those that know me know, I could talk for hours. When I do a little portion of the 40-hour training, the 3-hour segment goes on and on, and Laura Melendez has graciously invited me back to finish, so I can talk for a while about abuse intervention. If there's one thing I do want to add, which I thought was really important when Lil was talking about the use of coercive control, or otherwise known as battering behavior, whichever the terminology, the historical terminology. And Allison was talking about the pattern of behavior, but to echo, it's a relationship strategy, all by design. And there was something, again, that Alexis said that I made note of, because it was something that I heard somebody say in a group that I took note of, and the men in the group who have practiced controlling behaviors echoed. They would, early on in a relationship, they would accuse their partner of cheating, not out of jealousy, not out of insecurity, but because the act of accusing their partner of cheating always resulted in the partner trying to convince, and part of that prompted the victim to give over their phone, and then from that point in the relationship on, they had access to the phone. So the strategic nature of abuse is something that we have to remember. So like when thinking about isolation, from the onset of the relationship, it's all about achieving isolation and separation in order to maintain coercive control over the life of the other person. And that's another thing I think when we think about domestic violence, we have to move away from this idea of this like familial aspect of it. This is really an act against somebody's civil liberties. And we have to treat it as something like as such, like an act against someone's autonomy. And I think that was mentioned earlier on, I think by the mayor, the superintendent, the prosecutor, we were addressing the importance of understanding that this is an attack against somebody's civil liberties. But I do want to pass this to Marisa to speak on some of the services that ADV offers.
I'm still coming back to you, be warned.
So similar to Lil, the services at Alternatives to Domestic Violence, and that's thanks to the county's tremendous support, those services are 100% free. So, and that's something really important to us, that healing should be accessible to everyone and not a privilege, right? So that's something that we wholeheartedly believe in at Alternatives to Domestic Violence. So we do offer trauma-informed counseling. We have group services. We have legal advocacy support. We have crisis housing as well. So there's really, we try to look at the entire person holistically, and really we try to develop programs and supports that promote their safety and promote them moving forward.
And Patrick, just back to you for a moment, because you cracked the door on a very important topic as it relates to the misuse of technology, which is absolutely terrifying. Would you please explain to our audience, for those who are unaware, how technology is misused to control, to track, and even to stalk victims?
Yeah. Oh, I can't, but we should, because I want to go like to the more of a sophisticated point. There are people in our office that really have been studying this and can speak at length about it. But it's the phone. That's a strategy to get access to somebody's life. That could be anything. I know recently when we were doing a presentation in a college, they were talking about reckless driving as a strategy to maintain control. It's just the understanding of what coercive control is and what abuse is. It's an individual using whatever power they have in the given situation, whether it's the power they hold in their environment, whether it's the power they hold within the context of the room, to take away from somebody else, to force their partner to do something their partner doesn't want to do, to prevent their partner from doing something they do want to do, and to echo Allison, to create an environment where they're constantly living in fear. And if it's stalking, which is tracking somebody's phone, tracing somebody's location in their car with GPS, if it's I'm going to sound foolish when I say like cloning their phones, because I don't know this information. I'm listening and I'm learning from my colleagues around, which we all should do, which I want to echo back. I don't know an answer, but there's a lot of people who do know these answers, and we should all continue to talk and learn from one another. With an emphasis on one of the things that ADV started to do is invite feedback from survivors in focus groups, and it's something, an initiative that started two years ago, and it's incredibly valuable, and it's something that we need to do more and more. We need to hear from survivors, their experiences. Every time we listen to somebody like Danielle or Alexis, we learn. We learn more than we could possibly think we know, more than what the research might tell us. We learn real life applications, and we have to start really honoring that and developing policies around that.
I got to just jump in and add one more thing to that. I think also I want people to know that the image of a battered woman with black eyes and, casts on their arm and all that stuff like it was some kind of movie, I mean, although that exists, that's not typically what you see. And in fact, most batterers only use enough physical force to get what they want. So if they can stalk you, track you, control you, use that coercive control that we like to talk about, and then occasionally smack you to remind you what I can do, that's what they will do. So it's also important for people to know you don't have to. I've had victims describe to me being physically assaulted and telling me how it really wasn't that bad, right? Because it's, but the emotional abuse that was going on that led up to that was all the, and even when they're being good to you, and I put big quotes around that, the honeymoon phase, that's the benevolent form of controlling you. Gee, beating you up probably wasn't a smart thing because you might leave me, so let me say I'm sorry. Let me give you some flowers. Let me get back on your good side, right? I also want to say one more thing about isolation. If you have a family member or a loved one who's being abused, please do not close the door on them. Victims go back. They love these people. We heard it from Lex tonight. She loved him. If it was that simple, if only on that first date, there was a big sign on his head that said, I'm an asshole. But it's not like that. You fall in love with them, and by the time you're in love with them and you realize you're being abused, it's very hard to stop loving somebody. So, and it is hard for those of us who love victims to watch them continue to stay in this. It's like watching an addict continue to use drugs, right? But if you close the door, we're playing into the batterer's hands. If you say, I can't be here for you because it's too painful for me to watch, he's now further isolating her. See, even your mother doesn't love you. I love you, right? So please, I'm begging you. And as far as safety planning goes, you mentioned it, it's not just for the victim. It's for the victim's family. What do you need to do to stay safe that you can continue to be there when she's ready? Because she will be ready someday, or he will be ready someday. Are you going to be there for her? So that's part of the family also being part of the safety planning, right? Thank you.
And Lil, what is the impact on the children in the household when the abuser is allowed to return?
Oh, don't even get me started on that. That's a whole workshop. Yeah, please.
All right, listen, I want to share with you, I know you all think I'm 25. Thank you for that. You don't even have to say anything. But I started in this field 25 years ago. And I actually want to share with you, as quickly as I can, my very first day working in the field as a domestic violence counselor. I was working for an agency in Westchester. And the way our offices were set up, we were on a second floor storefront. So there were stores underneath us, and we were upstairs. You had to buzz in. There was a camera where we could see you for safety purposes. Somebody would ring the buzzer, and we would let them in. And this was my very first day working as a professional domestic violence counselor. And the buzzer rang, and I happened to be the person sitting next to the camera. And so I look in the camera, and what do I see? I see a woman with great hair and a nice purse. Go figure, that was the first thing I noticed. And so I buzz her up, and as she starts to come up the steps, and forgive my graphicness, I'm going to give it to you straight. As she begins to come up the steps, I actually had a gasp at what I was seeing. And what I was actually seeing was the whites of her eye were completely bloodshot, completely. She had about 40 some odd stitches in her brow, and that is where her husband had taken a jewelry box and pounded it into her face over and over and over again. She was missing her teeth from the left side down, all gone. And she had about, 25 or 30 stitches in her lip. And that's where he had taken her face and slammed it into the corner of her dresser. Her arm was in a sling. And that's because he had bent it back so far that he sprained it and sent her head first into her closet. And I told you this was my first day as a professional. I told you that. And so when something like that happens, they go into crisis mode. Everybody goes into crisis mode. And so who is running to find, now you're going to see how old I am, looking for the Polaroid to look for pictures or to take pictures because she wasn't quite ready at the time to go for an order of protection in New York, restraining order in New Jersey. She wasn't quite ready to go for the order of protection. And so if she changed her mind, we wanted to make sure that we had pictures. Who the attorney on staff is going to get her legal pads. We have to take her deposition. Everybody is sort of running in a different direction. And I have to tell you, it never happens this way. Nobody typically goes from the beating to the hospital to our non-residential services. I was working the non-residential part of the agency, which means I wasn't in the actual shelter. I was working for the clients who were going back to their batterers every night. And so, or left but didn't necessarily need shelter. And everybody is in a different direction. And the next thing I know, I'm sitting alone in a room. Did I mention it was my first day? Yeah. And I'm sitting alone in a room with her, and it is quiet. It is quiet. And she looks at me with what I can only describe as the sincerest of ignorance. And she says to me, "Do you think he can change?" Now, I had just graduated with my master's in counseling and human development. I have my attending skills. I can handle this. I can do this. And I think to myself, what can I go with? I can go with common sense. That's all I've got right now. Not today. That's all I had. That is literally all I had to say to her, was not today. Now, I tell you this story for a couple of reasons. First is because we have to go backwards before we can go forwards. And we have to understand that somebody who's being victimized every day is thinking, do we think this person can change? Because I don't want to walk through the door if I don't know what the hell's on the other side. I'll navigate if you tell me there's a chance. And I can tell you there's zero chance. Sorry, let me finish the sentence. I know. There is zero chance without accountability, without 100% accountability. So if excuses are being made, I love you so much, I was wrong, I shouldn't have done it, it was wrong of me, what was I thinking, but you made me so mad. It's that big but. And it's the but that negates everything that was just said that we have to understand, because so many women and men who are being victimized in their relationship get hung up on the but. And they hear only that first part. And they hang on so desperately to, can they change? Do they have that ability? And majority, many, without that accountability, 110%. I have a problem, and I was wrong, and I use power and control, and I take that from you, and I need to remove myself so I can get some help. Is there change? That said, I work in nonprofit. I was the adult counselor, I was the children's counselor, I clean the toilets, it's nonprofit. And so at the same time I was working with her 9-year-old daughter. Her 9-year-old daughter, who I had to remind myself wasn't a 35-year-old woman. That's some of the reaction, that some of the end result of constant exposure. And I can go on a whole diatribe on that, but I won't. What I can tell you is, if you asked her 9-year-old daughter what she thought of what happened to her mother, forgive my language, she said, "My mother was a bitch and got what she deserved." And that is one other response that we see, of many different responses. And we have to be super cognizant, super aware of how our children are being exposed and how the cycle continues. We have to go backwards to go forwards. The end.
Ms. Hellick, would you like to follow up on that?
No. I was thinking of Joe Torre though, because before I agree with Lil. This is a whole workshop in itself, which is, if we're understanding coercive control and the impact of abuse in a household, the children in that household are being impacted in this. Caution myself, but I'm going to say in such a same way that they're constantly negotiating their safety and the safety of their mother or their father. I went into gendered language, but they're constantly negotiating their own safety and trying to manage the household. And they're being impacted about the violence and the tension. Thinking about Joe Torre, who, and don't want to tell somebody else's story, but he's a survivor of domestic violence, and he would talk.
And
there you go. Okay, so I'll pause on that, and I'll pass it to Allison. But I do want to go. I know when Allison said No, I don't know that. Oh, no.
They colluded. No, I'm
No.
sorry. I'm Joe Torre's former director of programs for the Joe Torre Safe at Home
Oh,
Foundation.
there you go. So I'm
actually,
not going to tell the story. I'm not going to steal your information.
So I do.
But I
And
will
I
say
just
this.
say, if I was still there, I would so have tickets tonight, but it's okay.
And don't turn the mic off, because I feel like we'll just go back and forth. Because when you said the thing about like, can somebody who's abusive change, and you paused, the program that we have is intentionally designed to provide an opportunity to change, right? Abusive behavior is a choice. The program that we have is designed to provide the opportunity to change, but it's not built around the presumption that the individual wants to. The majority of the work that we do is trying to monitor risk and consider victim safety and report and collaborate and coordinate with the other people on this panel, the mandating entities, whether it's DCP&P, probation, courts, and in honoring, we view the people in our groups, and they know this if they're watching, we view them as the participants, and our primary client is the victims, or it's their partner, their children. And so that part, I think it's so important. I think it's important to recognize any individual is able to change, but also the horror, the reality that this behavior is a choice, and that it is intentional and selective, so that when the abusive behavior is occurring, and Alexis did such a beautiful job with that, saying he made those choices. And that is as frightening as anything else. But
I'm not sure. Because, sorry, that's the accountability piece. When I take ownership that I am perpetrating this, I am doing this. And now it's no different. I liken it a lot to alcoholism. We can throw somebody into AA, but if they don't buy into the fact that they're an alcoholic or have a problem, you know, how much change is there going to be unless I take accountability that I really need to do something different in my life? It's the sort of same methodology. You can tell me I'm wrong, though, but I believe that's my belief system.
I won't quote Joe Torre, but I will say, you know, many times working with children and even working with adults who grew up in violent homes, you hear the common thing that they could sense the tension in the home as they walked in or even before they walked through the door. And that's that's a reality. So that's an impact. That's a fear that people leave when they go to sleep at night. It's a fear that they, when we're speaking about children, it's a fear that they exist in when they're trying to study or pay attention to history class. And I think that's something that we have to remember when we're working with all people. And the only other thing, if I could just say this one thing, and then I'll mute myself. It's important to be a safe place for survivors. But also when you're in a community, we know what a bully looks like. We know when somebody's being controlling in a relationship, whether it's our best friend, our brother, our cousin, the people in our life. You can also confront them. You leverage the relationship you have with individuals. We talk about isolation. The flip of that, abusive behavior withers when the abuser's getting confronted. And there's a lot there, but I'm just talking about when you have a safe relationship, if it's somebody in your community, if it's somebody that you, whether it's like, again, a sibling, a best friend, you can have that. You can challenge their belief systems.
Judge.
We're having interesting conversations about the easy stuff. The easy stuff is, we know what violence is. You see somebody's got a black eye. You see somebody's missing teeth. You see somebody's got a scar. Those kind of folks need help, absolutely, and thank God that we have agencies that can do that. But domestic violence is much deeper than physical violence. We were talking, and I was listening because I presided over more cases than you have years. Think about this. It's the control. Now we all have our iPhones. Okay, you set your iPhones on to friends and family, whatever, and everybody knows where you are in the world. How about air tags? They cost nothing. Get 4 for $100. They're small. They're hidden. You can hide them inside a pocketbook and you can track somebody. Every day, if you start going through the advertisements that are on websites for newspapers, New York Times, Washington Post, scroll down, all these gadgets that you can get. GPS devices, which can be hidden in a car, undetectable. How about the latest I've been seeing advertisements for? Cameras. Cameras that are the size, half the size of a dime. I saw them last night during a Yankee game. You got the advertisement. They can put these cameras up all over. Don't think that doesn't happen. And folks who are trying to control, there are hidden cameras in houses. There are hidden microphones. There are eavesdropping devices. Can that be domestic violence? Absolutely. So I don't want anybody to have the impression that we're only talking about situations in which there's an assault or there's a kidnapping or there's false imprisonment. It goes beyond that. And it's important that we all keep that in mind, that it's all about control. And we should be aware that these devices are out there, and these are ways of controlling a person and following them, an invasion of their rights as a human being. I just want to make sure we knew that, Matt.
Judge,
add
thank
something
you.
as well?
And I wanted to, actually, I also have a question for you as well. So please speak on both points. I wanted to ask you what your advice is when it comes to the abuse of digital technology. Because I think, we're here tonight. We heard from Danielle. We heard from Lex. They're both the next generation. They're living in a generation of technology. And unfortunately, along with the benefits of the technology is the misuse of technology and the weaponization of technology. So I was going to ask if you could please speak to that in your experience, as well as, of course, joined in on this conversation.
Sure. I think it's always important to bring it back to documenting whatever you can. If technology is being used in an abusive way, being able to document how it's being used in that abusive way, and then being able to have that proof to bring forward whenever necessary. And then, also, there are many ways that you can, like a lot of privacy settings that you can access on your phones, even on like Apple, for example, because I go out, and one of the things we do at Healing Space as well is go to the community or like places in schools and talk to kids about digital abuse and things like that. So we also tell them sometimes, like, you have a setting on your Apple phone that you could, for example, before you receive a nude or sexually explicit image, like it can blur it out for you, things like that. And now when it comes to domestic violence in terms of its connections, I feel like, and what I was going to touch upon is just that technology is just continuously evolving. We even have things like AI, for example, which are being used in many different ways. So like the creation of synthetic images, right? So someone taking your face and putting it on another person's nude body and using AI, and then it kind of looks like that's your body and that's, a nude that you took or something, and that being used against people to blackmail people, right? Or sextortion them. We also have things like people taking copies of your voice and then using that as well with AI to then make it seem as if you're saying something else. And we see it used in a lot of different ways on social media for like jokes, right? Like, I know there was this one of, for example, President Biden saying ridiculous things, right? And people use it for many different things, but these things can also be used against other people, unfortunately, and can be forged in many different ways. And so in protecting themselves from that type of stuff, again, they need to be able to document it. They need to be able to bring these things forward so that we're more aware of these things happening, and then hopefully we're able to pass legislation and different things to hopefully stop these things from happening. I hope that answered your question.
You did.
But what I wanted to add was that these things also affect the kids, because I know we were talking about the kids, we were talking about technology. It also affects kids in a societal level, right? So we have so many different ways that this type of behavior is being normalized. So many different ways. For example, podcast, where we have men primarily spewing out very misogynistic things. And a lot of the kids will tune in to these type of podcasts and these type of people, and they'll look up to them, and they'll look up to the things that these people are saying and the way they treat women and the way they look at women, right? And we know that, of course, these things and domestic violence is something that affects men, but again, it primarily, or it affects women a lot more often, right? And so there's this attitude that is being put into the kids as well, these thoughts, these ways of thinking that we also have to address, that all kind of like connects to why we're going through, or why we're seeing the rates that we're seeing and different things like that. So I know I'm bringing it out to like a bigger scope, but I just feel like it's important to mention because again, technology, great thing, a lot of practical great uses, but it's also being used in a lot of negative ways. And again, being used in ways that could put people in a lot of trouble. So yeah.
And I'm going to, for a moment, go to Ms. Adoni. How does the Bergen County Prosecutor's Office handle such complex cases involving the using technology to abuse a victim?
So just like the evolution of technology, we see what's been happening. So our laws have evolved to match, or perhaps to try to match this advance in technology. So, for example, we did not, prior to the use of iPhones and social media and the internet, we did not have the laws, the cyber harassment laws, for example. Cyber harassment became a law after social media and the phones, the use of the phone became so prevalent. And so we see, we have laws that are, legislation to that effect. Now, what do we do if we have cases involving technology? We have obviously our office is well equipped, the law enforcement is well equipped to do subpoenas and get court orders to follow and find who the perpetrators are and what the text messages are and what the emails are. And I think that you all know that a text message is a text message, an email is an email. It doesn't just disappear even if you delete it. With the proper legal remedies, we can obtain those erased messages and bring them to life and prosecute the offenders. So the use of technology has its benefit for the abuser, but it also it leaves footsteps, and we are well equipped, and also we're getting more and more advanced in a way that technology gets advanced. We are also getting advanced in finding out who is the person behind the AirTag, who is the person behind the spoofed number, who is the person who is making the anonymous phone calls. For all that, we have the proper channels and the proper law enforcement to find out who these people are. I thought, I don't know if that...
You did, and I also want to make sure we address this question.
Matt, do you mind? I'm so sorry. I wanted to jump in because I'm really big on resources. And this used to be a question, if I put my old professional hat on, working in a school previously as a school counselor, what I would get from parents is, how do I keep up? Right? Technology is always changing. It's constant. And what are the sources? What can I look towards? And not even just as a parent, as a person, right? As a human, as we're talking about how important it is for all of us to be informed and aware. So, on all of our agency websites, I would be surprised if it wasn't there. I'm a betting person, so I know it is. We have toolkits. So there's different toolkits you could access for technology safety. But more importantly, I want to just plug a free trauma-informed, safe AI bot. This is, the bot is called Ruth by Parasol. Everyone in this community should write this down. it's a tremendous, again, trauma-informed RUTH. So Ruth is going to be your best friend. And I heard from a parent who used Ruth recently to help their child who is being sextorted, on Instagram through a message. Ruth was able to give very simplified steps how to obtain the information that you need and where to go to next with it, so that within an hour, that situation wrapped up. That's not the case for most. So having really important, accurate information at your disposal is so important. It's a tool advocates could use, or anyone. If you have a question, Ruth can perform safety planning. She speaks 85 different languages. So again, a tremendous tool that was that came by a survivor, who had experienced intimate partner violence, and used her skill set to develop something that we all can benefit from. So I really encourage, all of us to take a peek, take a look. That's one way to combat and kind of keep up with the technology advances.
We have a question that I think we need to address. What if there's a student in college who is fearful that if the student lives on campus or lives in off-campus housing, that decision would endanger their parent who is at home living with an abuser, and therefore they feel out of necessity they should stay at home to help shield the victimized parent from the abusive parent? How can that situation be addressed?
Come to my groups.
Go ahead. Mike.
Oh, the mic. I thought we were talking about, I thought you wanted Mike to answer.
No, sorry, microphone. Sorry.
To answer the question, I'm sorry. I'm getting
Sorry
tired.
about that.
Hungry and tired. Listen, I think in that case, there's no quick answer. There's some ideas, but I really think you need to, again, get involved with other people who know what's going on and get support and sort of safety plan that out. And by the way, a safety plan is not one and done. A safety plan is something that you're thinking about all the time. Not all the time. I don't want to make it sound like it's a living, it's like the Constitution. It's living and breathing, right? So it's not, I don't want people to think they have to be an OCD about it, but it's not something that you write it and put it in a drawer. If you get a new job, that might change your safety planning, right? If you, I don't know, have a new friend, it changes based on where you are and where you're going. If I'm going to go see my judge friend here, I have a lot different idea of what my safety is going to be like versus if I go see, someone I went to college with. So you just have to kind of keep thinking about that. Keep it in your consciousness and balancing keeping it in your consciousness without also then making yourself insanely anxious and afraid. And that's always the trick. So I say call one of these agencies that supports Healing Space, has wonderful programs. ADV does. We do. Find your group. It's a church, if it's enough, but group of people who support you and get what this issue is. Do not do this alone. There's people that want to help you. So that's what I would say. Find your persons. I had a client tell me that she shared with a very close cousin what was going on, and it couldn't have gone worse. The cousin got up and left her sitting in a restaurant. It was humiliating. And I'm like, what made you tell her? What were you hoping to get there? You got to find the people that are going to say, not give you a pass, not say, oh, you're perfect and everything's good, but sort of support you through that. Therapy. I do have a license in counseling. I think therapy, and I still go to therapy. So, and I'm laughing at the connections here. We're all connected one way or another. I know that's 6 degrees. He mentions Joe Torre. She worked for Joe Torre. She mentions working as a school counselor. She was my daughter's school counselor. So how do I know all you people over here? Tell me. Anyway, sorry, Matt. I don't even know what we're talking about anymore. I give you a lot of credit for still sitting there and listening to this because it's exhausting.
And how can, even though we addressed it more last year, how can a teenager who's in school now, who's in an abusive relationship, get help if they don't want to go to the police?
Well, so then again, now you're talking about teenagers that are being abused, which is a whole different law, and I think some of the legal people up here should talk about that because it goes to juvie and not the family court, correct? Am I right? Do I have that part of the law right?
Juvenile is part of family.
Oh, okay, here.
The juvenile system is part of the family court. We have one judge that's assigned just to do juvenile matters.
I think that, but if short of going to the police, they would have to go to the police in order to get relief through the juvenile courts, because it comes to the juvenile unit in the Bergen County Prosecutor's Office, and the police has to be involved. So to the extent that you're asking what can they do without going to the police, I would think that an agency would assist them. Would your agency assist? Yeah. Yes.
I was going to say, I know for Healing Space, we support anyone that's 13 and up, for example. I know ADV is 14 and up, right, if I'm not mistaken? So, yeah, we can also support teenagers with our own programs as well. And, yeah, that's just what I will add, though, sorry. If the teenager is 16 and up, they don't need the permission of the parents. But if they're under 16 in our agencies, in Healing Space, for example, 13 and up, 13 to 15, they would need the permission of their parents in some cases. So it'd be important to definitely do research before hitting up agencies. But there is that support out there for teenagers as well, dealing with domestic violence.
Yeah, and if I could just echo that, thank you. ADV also has the Youth Empowerment Program, where we provide counseling to adolescents.
Danielle, what advice would you have for other survivors of your generation, generally speaking, who are fearful to reach out and ask for help?
As someone who was also very fearful, it took me a while. If it wasn't for my brothers, honestly, I don't know what would have happened. When my ex-boyfriend kept stalking me and wouldn't leave me alone, harassed me, messaged my mom on all social media platforms that he can find, telling her every ounce of things that I have done, even though he was the one that also supplied me half of these ounces. A lot of times it was something with drugs that I was taking from him, like Xanax or anything. I told my mom, well, he gave it to me. So he was kind of throwing himself under the bus, but it got to the point where if I didn't speak to my immediate family, my oldest brother is in the military, and he was in California at the time, and somehow, in some way, he got my ex-boyfriend to leave me alone, along with my other brother, who is only a year and a half older than me. Without both of them being protective as they are, I think I would still be this day stalked my ex-boyfriend. Sometimes he still messages me. Sometimes he wasn't leaving me alone in the beginning. He faked a suicide attempt saying it was my fault. And if it wasn't for, thankfully, the police officer, Officer Wild at this school, if I didn't talk about it, if I didn't go to the right people, or even certain friends, even though certain friends didn't believe me because they said, I'm with you, I've never seen him hit you. Well, you're not there all the time. So it took me a while to figure out which friends I can trust, which friends are always in your corner in your darkest moments, and the ones that, the person you can call at like 2 a.m. or 11 o'clock of that friend that you know will pick up and help you, that would be your support system. For teenagers, at least, like I know a lot of us don't want to go to our mommies and daddies or grandparents or the person that takes care of us. Sometimes it's the counselors in the school. Sometimes it's a neighbor. Sometimes it's your friend's parents that you feel comfortable talking to. I would always recommend going to them. I'd always recommend just kind of leaving a safe space. Like some kids are like, well, my parents might judge me, or my parents are going to get mad at me about this. It's just, you have to tell them, regardless of what's going on, that you will be there, that you love them, that if they need help, no matter what, showing them these videos, like these are all recorded for the people at home, showing these to your kids, watching these with your kids, like taking moments, even if you go back through what you learned tonight, there's all the last 5 symposiums also online. Pick highlights that you think that will talk to your children the most, coming from people my age. Like, I mean, Lex and I happened at around the same time, and I am a lot older than her now. So you just want to make sure that you have the people in your corner. You want to make sure that you can talk to your kids freely, judgmental free, where they are not crazy, kind of things along the lines of like gaslighting. Like kids now say like no cap, whatever that means, I couldn't tell you. but learning their lingo and like benefiting from that, you're gonna sound dorky to them if you try to use their lingo, but like you're trying. So the more you try with your kids, the better. I am so grateful to have my mom as my best friend. She wasn't always my best friend. She didn't learn about my one ex-boyfriend being used to hitting me for fun until last year on the Symposium when she watched it live. So when I went home, she was very angry at me for not telling her, but she also told me, I am glad you got out of it. I am glad you had the right people in your corner during that time to get you out of it. But again, like anyone in my age, just talk to your parents if they are watching this at home and not wanting their parents to hear them. They have their little AirPods on, making believe that they're watching Netflix or something. Just do whatever you can to support them. Tell them about all these advocacies that are happening. Be like, I heard this today. Has this ever happened to you? Just try to make it an open conversation, because if you put in the effort of your kid knowing, wow, I can actually go to my parents. And even if you do tell them the messed up things you did as teenagers, that they're gonna be like, that's cool, or why can't I get away with that then? Just be like, I learned from this and I'm hoping that you can learn from it too. Because if it wasn't for my brothers and my mom and the smallest amount of friends that I have left during that time, which is basically only 2, honestly, I wouldn't probably be standing here today, because my ex-boyfriends were not the greatest people that I have picked, but they were a lesson learned, and I'm grateful for those experiences, because then I can also join Lex up here and tell you guys about it as well.
Thank you.
Just jump in, Matt, do you
Please,
mind?
yes, of course.
So a Partnership for Change, my agency, we are state trainers. We're prevention and awareness people, and we provide direct services through our programming, but people aren't seeking us out for counseling, and that's not how we work. We have programs in high schools. We have programs. We're the state trainers, victim impact for the police in the state. We've trained over 3,300 officers, law enforcement and victim witness advocates, and we train school counselors, over 1,000 in the state, and social service agencies. But one of the programs that we do run is a teen dating abuse peer leadership program called Power Back. We're actually running the program in many schools, but New Milford High School is one of the programs we're in actually right now. And what is so important, Danielle, and you said this, and it's so important, is, listen, here's the thing. In the state of New Jersey, please, legal people, correct me if I'm wrong. If I'm under the age of 18 and my partner is under the age of 18 and my partner beats me up or threatens me or any of this, unless I am emancipated legally, unless we have a child in common, or unless we're in the military, I cannot get a restraining order against my underage juvenile partner, nor can my parents on my behalf. Am I incorrect in that statement? Okay, so given the fact that there's not a lot of recourse if you're under the age of 18, who we have to rely on are the adults in our life. And the design of the Power Back program is to educate teens on not just understanding and defining abuse and all the types of abuse and the warning signs of abuse, because we go through that in the program, but how to help and support somebody who they believe, because and we've spoken to over 23,000 students in our state, and what we know is, first off, what we know is 1/4 of them, no matter what school district we've been in, and we've been in every one of them, yes, high, rural, suburban, urban, way high socioeconomic, lower socioeconomic, the numbers are usually always the same. 24% of them are going home to it. They're acknowledging it on their confidential evaluations. They're going home to it, and they're not talking about this. So we know there's an insane amount of students out there who are living this every single day and are saying nothing. The second thing that we know is that the vast majority, over 70%, would rather go to a friend for help before they go to an adult. So this is why it's so important that we educate teens correctly so they give each other the right information. But what we stress, because we're not teaching the kids who are involved in the program to be therapists or counselors or even crisis interventionists, we stress them to do psycho-ed, give them education and get them to adults. It is up to us as the adults to provide the safety net and that support system that our teens need. And part of what we do in our Power Back program is we speak to the adults. We train not just, we talk to administration, we speak to parents at PTO meetings or PTA meetings, because parents need to understand how to help and support. I honestly think, personally, Matt's heard me, comment on this years gone by. There should be a symposium on talking to parents specifically on what they need to know on how to support their children who they believe may, or how to mitigate it, how to get them out of it, or stop it before it starts, because parents are not in the know as much as they think they are in the know. This is the one topic teens aren't going to with, respectfully. And even those parents who say, I have the most wonderful relationship, my child will tell me everything, they're not necessarily coming to mom or dad or guardian and saying, I'm being coerced into giving oral sex, or they're not talking about and understanding the dynamics around jealousy and possessiveness, because that's so normalized with the teens, and they're just not verbalizing this stuff. We as parents and guardians have to be educated on how to respond and support without judgment, with empathy and understanding to help. That's really what's going to get our kids out of these relationships. 1 out of 3 teenage girls, 1 out of 7 teenage boys.
Ms. Adoni, on behalf of the Bergen County Prosecutor's Office and our panel, what are your parting words for tonight?
Something that I wanted to say, and I was hoping you'll ask me, but I'm going to say it. I can't tell you enough how important it is victims' cooperation in a criminal prosecution against the offender. It is our biggest obstacle in domestic violence cases is the lack of victim cooperation. She either go back to him, or doesn't want anything to do with it anymore, or I love him, I don't want to see him go to jail, I don't want to see anything happen to him. Our biggest obstacle to a successful prosecution is the lack of victim cooperation. And that, as a prosecutor and as a human being, that pains me greatly, because and I often get asked by victims, well, why can't you just prosecute without me? Or I don't want you to prosecute, or like, do whatever you want, you have to do, leave me out of it. And we can't. We are dependent on you, on a victim, to prove our case. And just to illustrate, I'm going to start from the end. When you go to a jury with a case, and you present your case to a jury, the jury wants to hear from the victim. And so I find that that's my biggest challenge as an assistant prosecutor in a domestic violence unit. And I've been doing it for a long, long time. I've been doing my first domestic violence case ever was in 2012 or 2013. And I remember that as a new prosecutor to that unit, coming from other units, I was stunned, and I couldn't understand why today, 11, 12 years later, I understand much better why victims don't want to come forward and don't want to participate in the prosecution. I understand it, and that's why I think this panel is so important, and each and every agency here is so important in helping us and helping each other. But I think that that's what really makes domestic violence cases so unique and so different from other cases, from any other burglary or robbery or any other type of aggravated assault. An aggravated assault on a domestic violence victim is very different than an aggravated assault on a stranger, because an aggravated assault on a domestic violence victim involves emotions, involves love, involves control. They know each other. They know everything about one another. And whether it's a household member, whether it's an intimate relationship, and so there is so much at stake, and I understand and I get it, and that's why we really have domestic violence laws, for that reason, because we recognize the nature of the relationship, but for the purpose of a prosecution, getting the victim to cooperate and get to that point where she can put the relationship behind and try to put the emotions inside and go ahead with the prosecution is a very, very big step. So my parting words is, for all the victims out there, utilize the agencies and the support that Bergen County has to offer. Utilize that and come forward. Without you, we cannot put the offenders away. We can't.
Thank you. I'd just like to, for me personally, I think probably the most important message, not to oversimplify a complex issue, is to remind survivors and those who know, love, and care about survivors that you're not alone. You may feel alone, you may feel isolated, but you're not. And there are people who want to come together to help you. This is a problem that transcends any of our differences. This is a problem that doesn't care if you're Republican or Democrat, what religion you are, what race you are, or what gender you are. As a result, the solution is to be united and come together as a community to solve it. Just to shed a little bit of brief insight, we got the support in planning this program from both major political parties. We got the support of multiple police departments throughout Bergen County, which ranged from actively giving me suggestions and advice creating the program to posting and sharing our event flyer to help us reach and help more people. The New York Giants have been actively helping us promote our program from the very beginning. Our business community has helped us get word out in a variety of ways. So I can't begin to show our appreciation and our gratitude for all of our different community sectors and all of our different community members for coming together to help solve a community problem. And I just want to reiterate that this program is presented to all of you as a partnership of the Borough of New Milford, the New Milford Public School District, the New Milford Mayor and Council, the New Milford Board of Education, and the New Milford Police Department. And we're eternally grateful to all of our stakeholders and partnering agencies who are both here today and have at any point participated or supported previous symposia. On behalf of our New Milford family, thank you and good night.